Right, the history of Great Langdale is pretty much the history, reflects the history of most of the other lakeland valleys. They're not absolutely identical. The name comes from the Vikings. The Vikings were here in about AD 900, and Great Langdale just means Great Long Valley. Now, the basic shape of Great Langdale hasn't changed much in the last 12,000 years. All the valleys in the Lake District are a result of glaciation. We had about 4 ice ages in the Lake District. The trouble with an ice age is every time you have a new one, it destroys evidence of earlier ones. It's kind of a bit like wiping over a blackboard. You may see some of what the teacher wrote around the edges, but the main bit in the middle is all gone. So glaciation has caused the basic shape of them. Now, after the ice receded around 12,000 years ago and the country warmed up a little bit, it would have taken on a tundra-like appearance, and what would have happened, small shrubs and mosses would have started to grow. Then they were replaced by trees, birch trees, ash trees and oak trees, and the woodlands would have been all over the whole of the valley. Up to around about 2,000 feet would have been covered in trees. Now, as you can see, there is still some woodland, but a lot of it has gone. Now, man has cleared most of the tree line away. None of it went to waste. Every single twig of it was used for something. This little village that we're coming into now, Elterwater. The reason Elterwater is here is because they used to make gunpowder here. There were around about 6 or 7 similar such gunpowder factories in this south part of the national park. Now, what they would do with the timber here, once they felled it, they would burn it down and make it into charcoal. Charcoal is an important component part of gunpowder, and that's why Elterwater is here, because of the abundance of timber that was suitable for making into charcoal, and also there were lots of fast flowing streams, so they could harness the sort of that for water power. Now, the gunpowder factory started in Elterwater in around about 1824, and it went on until the early 1920s, just after the First World War ended. And the reason they stopped making gunpowder is because they developed more powerful explosives like dynamite. Nowadays, there's very few people living in Elterwater. It's nearly all given over to second homes. So wealthy people buy cottages in Elterwater just to keep themselves for weekends, or else they will buy them as an investment to rent out to people who want to come on holidays. But these cottages here would originally have been built for people working in the gunpowder factory. Now, the one here was owned by a guy who you will have heard of before, Mr. Nobel. He of Peace Prize fame. He owned the gunpowder factory here. Now it's a large hotel and timeshare complex. The reason we bring you on this little back road is because we like to show people Little Loughrig Tarn. It is quite beautiful. And when they did the film of Beatrix Potter's life in 2007, they used this area around here as a location. Now, the reason they came here is because it's very similar. The terrain is very similar to what you get around near Sorry, where Hilltop is, where she spent most of her sort of life in the Lake District. The problem with Hilltop is it's very busy, particularly in the early summer when most of the filming was done. So what the film crew didn't want was Renée Zellweger walking around on location when suddenly she's sort of crowded out by hordes of fell walkers, complete with cagoules and maps and things like that. So that's why they did a lot of the filming up here. Farm here, the buildings that are here now date from the sort of early 1700s, but there's been a settlement here far longer than that. There's an area behind the farm called the Ting Mount, and that was used by the Vikings. The Vikings were here in about AD 900. Now, they didn't come here raping and pillaging or anything like that. The Vikings that were here were 3rd generation Vikings, and they would have come over from the Isle of Man. So the Ting Mount was an important meeting place for them. If you look to the left, just over this gate, you can see there's some information boards. So this and a piece of raised up ground. There's a little house coming up here on the right. I know Wordsworth wrote about it in one of his poems. A friend of mine used to live here. He used to rent it, and it looks like the ideal place to live, but it does have a few drawbacks. There's no mains electricity. You can see there's an outside light, so there's obviously electricity comes from somewhere, and it is supplied by a little diesel generator that lives up in the hills there. The problem with the diesel generator is it runs out of diesel from time to time, and suddenly all the lights go out, or more importantly, the telly goes off, and it does cause a few difficulties. There's no main sewage, but there's septic tank, and there's water is fed from a spring. Getting out in winter can be quite interesting as well. We don't get a lot of snow here, as I've said, but you do get a lot of cold and ice. The tour you're doing today, we don't do it really between the 31st of October and really sort of the middle of March. It's off, is this one. You could never run it with any degree of certainty. So the two passes are a similar height. I think they're about 1,200 feet at the top. Hard Knot is far more tricky to drive. This one is usually quite straightforward. Famous last words. Now, these roads were used by the army during the Second World War for driver training. By the end of the war, the roads were in a terrible state. They were like little better than dried up riverbeds. And the government said that they would pick up the tab for repairing the roads. Now, at the time, there was 3 local authorities were responsible for this part of the national park. It hadn't been formed then, but this area. Where we are now is Westmoreland. That's my home county. Out to the left, it was Lancashire, and to the right, ahead, was Cumberland. Now, the three local authorities had different ideas about how they would spend the money they got. Westmoreland decided it would be a really good idea to repair the road with concrete, and this is what they did. And apparently it looked like a strip of white toothpaste running up the hillside. You know how white concrete is when it's new. The other two had a sort of better approach to it, but now we're all the same. At the top of the pass, there's a stone, like a big boundary stone, and it's called the Three Shires. Shire is the old word for county. So this was where the 3 counties used to meet. In 1974, we had made major local government reorganisation, and we're now all Cumbria. Westmoreland and Cumberland are no more. So this is the top of the Rhinos Pass. Now, over to the right, you can see some poles sticking out of the ground. They're tubes. Inside those tubes are young trees, and they put them in tubes like that just to protect them, not just from the grazing sheep, but also from deer. There are a lot of deer, wild deer around here, so they'll eat the trees. Now, the hill that's just coming into view now immediately in front of us, the pointed one, that's called Harter Fell. And that's an indication that this would once have been a royal hunting forest, or a hunting forest, because hart is the old word for a deer. Back then, it would have all been extensively wooded, so there would have been a lot of cover for big game like that. We have a programme on British TV. It's for, I know a few of you like your cars, it's for petrol heads. It's called Top Gear. I don't know whether any of you have seen it.
Every episode.
You've seen it every episode. So it's a bit laddish, a bit sexist, mildly, and they're here quite regularly filming. Because the twisty road, they drive through at a great rate of knots, and you've got the sort of fantastic backdrop with the mountains. So you get Top Gear in the States, do you?
Oh yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, the old Top Gear is better than the new Top Gear.
Yeah, I thought you'd probably say that.
But he decided to hit one of those producers.
He did, yes. He got himself in a lot of trouble over that. I suppose there's 2 schools of thought about that. If you hit somebody at work, whether it be a colleague or a customer, you can expect your P45 and to be given your marching orders. So some would say, why should it be any different for